Final passage, pretty good example of a typical feature among LSAT passages. You take a somewhat difficult idea, present it in dense language, and then ask a bunch of questions that are very easy if you've really understood what you've read. The main point of the passage was that the modular theory of mind is broken, and it is given substance and it is given credence by the very measurement tool that is supposed to be measuring it. That is, the whole thing is circular. You go in believing that there are different modules of the brain, that light up for reason or for emotion or for whatever. And then you use this subtractive functional MRI that obscures the fact that during the whole process, brain is working, the whole brain is working. And that's the point of it, right? I mean, that you've got a baseline operation of oxygen use in your brain, and we just subtract that out and pretend that it doesn't exist. But that's dumb. But when we do it, it makes it look like there are certain areas that are localized for certain brain activities, and because it looks that way, we think it works that way, and then we think it works that way, so when we measure it and it looks that way, it confirms our belief that it works that way because it looks that way, and you see the circle. And this is the author's argument, that circle is obscuring the fact that during the whole process, the whole brain is working all the time. The brain is not modular. The brain is an amalgamation of lots of different areas working in concert. And that's the main point of the passage. And to pretend otherwise by using brain imaging is to commit an error both in the way we think about it, the assumption that it is modular, and also in the way that we measure it. The subtractive method simply amplifies the problem with the main premise of modular thought. All right. So the main point of the passage was all that I just said, but I could say it more simply. The use of brain imaging is really problematic for psychology, for thought. Look at answer choice B in question 20. The use of brain scans relies on a questionable premise. What's the questionable premise? Line 14, the premise is known as the modular theory of mind. We don't like that. And a misleading methodological approach. Both of those things were things we were talking about when we finished talking about the passage. The misleading methodological approach, easy for you to say. I'm in line 48. The method obscures the fact that the entire brain is active. So it's a faulty premise that we're modular, and it's faulty method because it obscures the true fact of the brain's overall activity. 21, according to the modular theory of mind, what do we think? That everything is localized. Line 11, the mind can be analyzed into separate and distinct modules or components. It consists of distinct components in localized areas. Couldn't ask for anything more direct than that. Question 22, what does the author think about the subtractive method? It's part of the problem. It's a bad methodology, and it's circular, right? I'm in line 46. One immediately obvious problem is that this method obscures the fact that the entire brain is active in both conditions. At the end of the passage, isn't the modular theory of mind ultimately attractive in part because it is illustrated so well by the products of the subtractive method? There's that circular reasoning involved. D, the subtractive method seems to strongly support the modular theory of mind. Yes. Because it creates an illusion that brain functions are localized. Yes. That's what we're after. Same thing every time, what does the passage say? And so your reading needs to be functional. And a functional structural reading is the kind of reading that makes you fast and accurate at answering questions. So the purpose in question 23 of the final paragraph really goes back to the purpose of the third paragraph. And the third paragraph starts by saying, if this critique of the modular theory is valid, how can you account for the brain scans? And they're lighting up. Well, the fourth paragraph answers how we can account for those. So, second paragraph gives us the author's position that, you can't act as though the brain is localized and modular. The third paragraph says, well, what about brain scans? And the fourth paragraph says, I'll tell you what about brain scans. They're an illusion. So the fourth paragraph shows why the type of evidence discussed in the third paragraph, brain scans, does not defeat the argument presented in the second paragraph. The third paragraph asks, how can you account for brain scans? The fourth paragraph shows how the brain scans do not argue strongly against the idea that the brain is not, in fact, modular. And that's that structural reading that I was talking about. We talk a lot more about how to do that during the course. Question 24, why does the author talk about x-rays? Well, look at what she says. A brain scan, I'm in line 5, is similar in principle to an x-ray. It's a way of seeing inside the body. For medicine, it is straightforward and indubitable. But why do we bring up x-rays? To make the contrast clear, to show that there is a good use of MRIs, and then there's the stupid use of them. To contrast a valid use of scans with one of more doubtful. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect. And that's all we have to do. Just go back and see what the passage says, and whatever the passage says, that'll determine the right answer. It's, really straightforward, at least in what it is we have to do, right? Right. 25, perhaps my favorite question in the whole section. Strong competition from questions 1 and 8, but still, what does William Uttle say? I'm in line 20. Various mental processes are properties of a more general mental activity that is distributed throughout the brain. E, features of a general mental activity that is spread throughout the brain. Come on. For 26, how do we know that C is true? Well, we describe that subtractive method. I'm in line 40. You take a baseline measurement in the control condition. Then you take a second measurement, and then you subtract the baseline from the second measurement. So baseline, second measurement, and you subtract the baseline, and then what is left is the metabolic activity. So what that means is there has to be more oxygen used in the second measurement, or D, during the performance of certain cognitive, I said D. I looked at a C. I started reading what came after a C. I don't know why I said D, because D is the first letter of Dave, perhaps. Perhaps an fMRI would explain. C, during the performance of certain cognitive tasks, the areas of the brain that are most metabolically active show a rate of oxygen use that is higher than that in the rest of the brain. How do we know that for sure? Because that's the way we achieve the light up method, is by subtracting out that lower level of oxygen use from the baseline scan. The passage says it. We apply what the passage says, and we know we've got the right answer. 27, we're going to start by describing what happened in the passage. Those scans show that there is activity throughout the whole brain, and yet we use the subtractive method to only talk about the activity where it's the highest, as though the rest of the activity didn't matter. Same thing that's happening in answer choice B. And actually, using that reasoning, we know that C, D, and E are just like nowhere near it. A is at least reasonably close, so we'll talk a little about it. Answer choice B has exactly the same reasoning. People are shopping there year-round, but we act like it was only the summer shoppers that were influenced because we got more of them in the summer. In the same way, with brain scans, the whole brain is working, but we act as though only the amygdala matters because we get more activity in the amygdala. It's the same kind of reasoning. Answer choice A is not completely different, but it is different. For A to be the same, we would want to say the mayor, we don't know if it's a he or a she. So the mayor was elected by a larger margin in certain districts of the city, so those were the only districts that elected her. That would be similar, but we didn't say that in A. We said that the mayor needed those districts. Fine, that may be true, but that is a different method of thinking to say that we needed these areas than it is to say only these areas are the ones that matter. And that finishes off this passage, and that finishes off this section.